Wage determination explains the exact mechanism that dictates the market value of human labor, making it a critical topic for both the classroom and the real world. Unlike a physical consumer product, nobody buys labor just to own it. Economists call this a derived demand. A shop owner only hires a skilled carver because consumers want to buy wooden ones. The demand for the worker is entirely derived from the demand for the good they produce. On the other side of the transaction is the supply of labor. This is simply the total number of people in an economy who are both willing and able to work at various wage rates. This creates the classic labor market graph. When we plot the downward-sloping demand from employers against the upward-sloping supply from workers, they inevitably cross. That intersection is the free market equilibrium, the point where the need for workers perfectly balances the number of people looking for a job. This intersection establishes the market-clearing wage. At this specific rate, W1, there is no shortage and no surplus. Every single person willing to work at that price gets hired. When drawing this in an exam, do not use the generic terms price and quantity. Examiners look specifically for wage rate on the vertical axis and quantity of labor on the horizontal axis. In an uninterrupted market, wages are dictated entirely by the math of employer needs and worker availability. No outside force tells the employer what to pay. But that mathematical balance has a major flaw. The free market does not care about human survival. An equilibrium wage might clear the market perfectly on paper, but still leave workers without a decent, livable income. Workers often try to fix this themselves by forming trade unions. Through a process called collective bargaining, they negotiate with employers as a single, powerful entity to secure better pay, rather than bargaining as disposable individuals. When collective bargaining isn't enough to prevent exploitation, the government steps in. They implement a national minimum wage, a strict legal mandate dictating the absolute lowest amount a firm can pay its employees. Returning to our chart, a minimum wage acts as a price floor above the natural equilibrium point. At this higher wage rate, the quantity of labor supplied increases, but employers face higher costs and hire fewer workers. Shading the horizontal gap between demand and supply highlights an excess supply of labor, unemployment. Government intervention physically wedges the graph open. It permanently separates the volume of labor that companies can afford from the volume of labor that people are eager to sell. For the workers who manage to keep their jobs, this policy is highly successful. It directly raises their standard of living and pulls low-paid employees out of poverty. But the immediate consequence falls on the most vulnerable. Unskilled and inexperienced workers, the exact people the law is meant to protect, are often the first to be let go, priced entirely out of the labor market. The severity of those job losses isn't random. It depends on a hidden variable, the elasticity of demand for labor in that specific industry. Look at Graph A. When demand for labor is inelastic, represented by this steep curve, employers cannot easily replace workers. Notice how narrow the labor surplus bracket is. In Graph B, the flyer elastic demand means firms replace workers, causing a significantly wider labor surplus. This dynamic is the key to writing a top-tier essay evaluation. Rather than labeling the minimum wage as purely good or bad, argue that its success depends entirely on whether the specific labor market is elastic or inelastic. Mastering labor economics requires accepting a difficult truth. Every attempt a society makes to protect its most vulnerable workers requires a calculated trade-off against the strict mathematical realities of employment.
All right, the fire in the common room is dying down. But before we snap the pop-up book shut, let's lock these key points into your brain so you absolutely crush this section of your IGCSE exam. First, always remember, wages are determined by the interaction of demand and supply. Second, do not forget the phrase derived demand. Employers only need workers because consumers want the stuff those workers produce. Third, trade unions use their size and unity to negotiate better pay through collective bargaining. And finally, the national minimum wage is a government price floor that protects workers for sure, but it can also potentially cause a surplus of labor, leading to unemployment.
Hermione closes the book with a solid snap and leaves us with one last, pretty big question to chew on. If a minimum wage is absolutely crucial to protect vulnerable workers, but standard economic theory warns us it might just cause a surplus of unemployment, how exactly is a government supposed to perfectly balance its labor market policies? There aren't really any easy magic spells to solve real-world economic puzzles like that. But hey, understanding the core concepts is the very first step. Thanks so much for joining us for this explainer. Keep studying, keep asking questions, and we'll catch you next time.